I just want to give you a little context of why we chose to bring this topic this year. So coming from the curriculum and teaching department here at TC, during my master's, I had a chance of witnessing some of the implementation issues we were having in New York with the Common Core. And right now, Brazil is going through that same process. And Brazil is a very large and significant country, and this is a very important change. When we heard about the topic and making a world of difference, and considering some of the work that TC alumni are doing in Brazil, especially related to public policy and to social change, we thought that this was not only a really important topic to bring up, but a great chance of getting an input from the titans of Teachers College. This table right now is probably, this is the heavyweight league of teaching, and we thought that this was a great chance of bringing out this message and inviting more people, Brazilians and people everywhere, to join this conversation. So I'm going to be mediating, but this is a talk, so you're all invited to join in. And the idea here is that we're all going to give you a little bit of an input on this process, but also we'll discuss with each other, since we have very important and sometimes contrasting points on the subject. So I would actually like to start introducing our panelists. Vera, Cabral, and all of their bios are described. I'm not going to waste our time on all of our bios because literally it would take maybe 3 hours to talk about all of us. But Vera is a new visiting scholar at Teachers College and one of our main spokesperson for all of what is the business and the publishing and the underlying mechanisms that a new Common Core or new standards will influence in Brazil. President Fuhrman, and she is here especially because she knows and she talks about and she is able to give us a first-hand look on what we should be watching out for as we implement. Professor Lynn, I had the pleasure of visiting with her last time she was in Brazil, and she brings us the perspective of the teacher. And I will introduce and pass on the word to Alice. To give us, Alice is the executive director of Movimento pela Base, and it's a nonprofit that organizes all of and most of our private and public institutions focused on doing the advocacy for the national standards movement. So I will pass on to Alice with the question. So why, Alice, why is this happening now? Why is this coming? Give us a little bit of a background story of the movement and what's going on in Brazil.
Well, thank you, Leticia. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And it's a pleasure to be here at TC in this conversation. This group of 60 people got together to solve a problem. And our problem is that we have 44 million students who don't have their right to education fully fulfilled. So when we look at Brazilian numbers, we have 44 million students, 2 million teachers, 183,000 schools, public and private, and students are not learning what they have the right to learn. When we look, for instance, at third graders or 8-year-olds, only 1 out of 10 can read and write properly by the 3rd grade. When we look at children who are leaving high school, they've been leaving high school without knowing what they should know. That's also 1 out of 10 in math. That means 1,800,000 students out of 2 million not knowing what they should have known. this is a problem we want to help solve. We, of course, believe that creating national learning standards, this is not a silver bullet, but this is something that provides the system with a backbone, since it shows what means the right to education, what every student has the right to learn and when, and what they should know and what they should know how to do. So once we have such standards, we can align to that teacher training, assessments, textbooks, and the whole system is going to be organized by that and not the other way around, which is what happens today. So this is the problem we as a group, Vera is part of the group, we as a group want to help solve. And this group is comprised by around, is it working? Yeah. 66 people, public administrators from all levels of government, Congress people, people who are at the National Educational Council, NGOs, experts, teachers, who came together in 2013 to try to make a world of difference for these 44 million students. So why is it happening now? Brazil set in its constitution in 1988 that it should have national learning standards. There are other laws, very important ones, that also said that this should have been built. So we are late. We are like 30 years late. But we're here, and that's good. So this group helped in some ways to make this discussion advance in the country. So we've came together as a group in 2013. Some of the things we've been trying to do is, for instance, to set this topic in a national law that was passed in 2014 with a deadline saying that this national learning standard should be built in 2 years. We've been providing resources to the discussion to deepen and widen this discussion. We've been helping to set and keep this topic in the country's agenda. And just for you who are not Brazilians or who are not following the Brazilian news, in the past 4 years we had 2 presidents and 7 ministers of education. So it's in a political turmoil, which is not very different from what you're also living here. But yeah, this is what this group, which also is comprised of people from different political background, has been helping to do. So the process now is as follows. So in 2015, the construction of the standards started by the Ministry of Education. The group doesn't write the standards. This is not our job. Our job is to advocate for the creation of quality standards. So the Ministry of Education, together with public administrators, teachers, and experts, they started constructing this document in 2015. The first version of this document was released in 2015. This massive public consultation started, so it was open for 6 months. There were over 12 million contributions from over 300,000, especially educators, from the whole country. The second version of the document was released in 2016, and then all the states and municipalities that they got together to discuss the second version. Over 9,000 teachers discussed it and provided the Ministry of Education with clear recommendations on what should be improved in the document. And the day before yesterday, we had the third and finalized version of the document being handed over from the Ministry of Education to the National Council of Education. This is a huge step, and there's still a lot to be done. Actually, the hard part is starting now with implementation. It's important to highlight that this document is focused on early years and until K9. Yeah. High school is still to be done, so it should be ready this year. The National Council of Education will discuss this document, and it says, they say that by the end of the year they will hand it back to the ministry, and then implementation, they say, should start by 2019.
Thank you, Alice. I like what you said, that And we heard this today when Phyllis was being presented, that tomorrow is too late.
Tomorrow's too.
And I think that with this, I would like to pass on to Vera and get her input in what are then the challenges of this process that you are seeing and that you see from inside Brazilian public institutions.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. And it's a great opportunity to be here discussing this theme that is very important for us. And I would like to start saying that my point of view here adds to Alice's one is that now we have a good document, and I think that we have started in a good way, very collaborative, which is not our tradition in Brazil. So this has been, this is already a big change. And I think that we have to continue this way. My concern is with implementation. I'm not saying it was easy to build this document. It was a very, very hard task, especially to have a quality document like I believe we have now. But I think that implementation is the hardest part when we talk about every public policy. And so actually, now we have something that really changed the way education is organized in our country. First, because we have a very, very content-based education, and we are moving to a competence-based education. Next thing I would like to talk about is that we have a model that is quite centered on teaching, and we are moving to another centered on learning. This is also a big shift. And we also have a model where we have no clear definition of what a student should learn. And now we are moving to another one where we have this definition. And in my opinion, this is very important for society, for parents to know what each student should learn at each grade. So it's a big shift. It's a paradigm shift. So because of this, well, I'm only mentioning these three reasons, but it's much more than that. So it can give us an idea of what a challenge we have to face from now on. And as I told you, we are very used to top-down strategies when we talk about public policies. And we are quite aware that this is not going to happen. Nothing will happen if we still stick to this kind of strategy. Actually, we live in a different world. We live in a world where people connect, where people make movements. And just to mention Brazilian case, we have the occupation of many schools in the recent time, and we also had big manifestations. They were all organized through internet, through social medias. So I think that technology is here. It's a fact. And we have to use technology to our purposes, and we have to learn to use that. So this is one of the things we have to face, and we have to start learning how to use it in favor of a major change like this. Actually, implementation won't happen if we don't involve properly every stakeholder in the process. And teachers and parents and students are very important stakeholders that normally are left behind when we talk about public policy, especially in education. We have a big array of reforms in education. I will stay from the 90s, not to go too far, but from the 90s on in Brazil we have many, many reform educations, and we have just gradual success on those reforms. And we normally work the way I've told you about. So they are mostly top-down reforms. So actually, for the implementation, we have to take great care of how we involve all the stakeholders. I mean, we are a federal country like you are. We have 27 states, but we have 5,600 municipalities, which are equally entitled to build their own curricula. So this will be a major movement and a major work to be done. And most of our municipalities have less about nearly 90% have less than 50,000 people, and universities are very concentrated on big cities. So they don't have access to technical support to be able to build curricula as we are expecting to be built from this national document. So we'll have to find ways, we will have to find support to enable people to be able to be owner of this reform and to really implement and to get to the results we expect to have. So said that, I would like to pass the word to other ones, and it's a challenge.
I'll steal it from you. I think that you brought up some of the really big challenges we're going to have. And that being said, I don't think that when we implemented the Common Core in the States, we were not aware of them. I think we were aware of them. And they're right now into this process. Some things, even being aware, did happen and some things didn't. And one of the things that during this process we heard a lot was, well, Brazil is now going to copy the United States, or Brazil is going to copy this other country. And it's been a challenge, and I know especially for the two of you, to guarantee the identity of the Brazilian document as itself. But again, so bringing in a little bit of your experience and what you have seen and the challenges you have seen, and maybe Susan, I'll send this to you. Where should we looking at during these next few months with the Brazilian standards?
Thank you, Leticia. The challenge of implementation is so great with any major policy reform. I've written a book called Implementation for Dummies in my head many times.
That's time to
Not
publish
yet written it, but I can see it with the yellow and black cover. You know, there are things about changing policy that we've learned over the years. We've certainly learned these lessons with standards reforms that were state level, that predated the Common Core, which may have been somewhat different in content, but basically offered the same kind of implementation challenge. So let me just, a few of these lessons. The first is to think about sequencing. No one does everything at once. Maybe Cynthia Germanata, but we can't do that. And there are logical sequences that flow from the policy. Some things have to be done first. So, you know, I would argue if you have standards, the very next thing is curriculum, not assessment. Because standards are vague. I mean, they are intended to be encompassing, and they need to be expressed in curricula before one develops assessments, because in the absence of that, all you have is the assessments, and you teach to the assessments. So you need the curricula. It doesn't mean that a ministry has developed all the curricula, or you know, you need one curriculum model. You might use 2 or 3, but you need all that. And I've always believed it's romantic to think that teachers are going to teach all day and go home at night and write all the curricula they're going to need. So I think, you know, we need that done at various levels, so that it exists before you do other. And it's that curricula, the student curricula, that should inform the curriculum for teacher ed or for professional development. The professional development we know works best is when it's deeply embedded in the student curricula and what students have to learn, and not sort of generic things like don't smile for the first few months. That's never been any, that used to be, but I mean, it's never been any of particular help. So sequencing, how you're going to figure out what to do first, is always important. Every step of the process involves capacity building or learning. You know, any policy depends on people. at the street level, so to say, to implement them. In political science, there's a whole set of work around principal-agent theory. The principal wants to do something, but depends on the agents out there to do it. And the agents interpret things differently, and they may not have the same information, and that's the challenge of implementation. In education, there's an extra challenge that a number of my colleagues over the years have worked on, which is that most of the things you want people to do involve them learning how to do new things.
Yeah.
It's not just that they can change, turn around on a dime. They have to learn how to do it. They have to learn how to teach more nonfiction as part of their everyday practice, which is something that characterizes our standards and how to incorporate it. Policymakers at the various levels have to learn how to write the regulations and guidelines, when this kind of policy change is so different and so dramatic. Most of all, I think schools and teachers need much more technical assistance than anyone imagines. We have, in this country, stripped out all the content people, all the people who know about teaching and learning from state and local agencies. Anytime there was a budget cut, those are the people who went. You go visit a state agency, and it's mostly the accountants and the lawyers who are accounting for federal money, and they don't really know anything about supporting schools, and the same can be said at the district level. So we have not attended to capacity building. We haven't thought about teachers learning how to change their practice if it's going to be student-centered and what kind of supports they're going to need for that. And there are many ways this could be done. You could imagine governments having requests for proposals. So I always, kind of raise my hand because here we are at Teachers College, so, ask us to help. My colleagues and I used to use the expression that you need to pack the environment with capacity, and it could be from various sources, but it's got to be there, and it's got to be readily available, and the people who are making the changes need to know that they can call on it. And the third thing I'll say is, fallout of the other two, which is time. It takes a lot of time for people to learn to do new things, and we need patience, and patience is not expressed by assessing the students on new content before even the curricula were developed or practice changed or professional development was given. That is not. Yeah. It's important that what happened in the Common Core in the United States created particular time pressure because the federal government gave incentives to states to adopt the Common Core using federal stimulus money that came in the aftermath of the recession in 2008. All that money had to be spent by 2013. And they had to do things so fast, there was no way they could sequence right or build the capacity, and it was just, it was a mess. So we distributed, in case I don't have a chance to talk about this later, a very thoughtful chart from California, which did not participate in that program, Race to the Top, there it is, which is actually, I can brag because it's an old colleague of mine who is now the Secretary of Education in California and chair of the state board. But you can look at all the pieces that you have to work on, and in California, they've thought out who's doing what when. And they had the time to do this. I'm not saying things are perfect, but they're not by any means. There's a long way to go. But they've been thoughtful about how they're working on it instead of what happened in New York, which was helter-skelter, and whatever could be done cheaper and with the money first was done first, and it's a mess. So between us, is this being live streamed?
Between us and the world.
Yes.
Yes.
If you want to know more, you'll have to see me. Thank you. Yeah.
And taking that lead, I think that Vera brought this and Susan just brought this. It takes time and it takes capacity building. Lynn, where do you see our challenges, and how can we be ready? And what are some of the essential things we should be thinking about?
The good news and the bad news about being the last person on the panel is that everything actually has already been said. And so I can just say, ditto to it all. I'll sort of talk about some of the same things, but from the perspective of that person on the ground, the classroom teacher, and the school building leader, principals, whose job it is to actually implement. So in preparation for this, I had a conversation last night with a local principal in the Bronx. She's a graduate from Teachers College. She's one of the most amazing teachers and principals I know, and a straight talker for sure. And I had a good sense about her perspective on the Common Core. She has been quite vocal about it, but at the same time wanted to talk to her specifically about this. She's a supporter. She always has been. She said it really helped them, it helped her as a leader, as a teacher, to be able to sort of work with her teachers around a common set of standards, to sort of aim for the same goals, to speak the same language, to have some sense, to be on the same page. So she said, I have no issues, never have had any issues with the Common Core. It's not about rigor, it's not about high expectations, it's not about standards. Those are all good things. But it is always about how you get there. And a quote from her was, it's hard to learn on the go. So that's the main lesson always. We have these conversations and we look over history in terms of any kind of innovation or reform. We seem to repeat the same mistakes over and over. It takes time to make a world of difference. And in order to do that, we have to think about how to create, set aside, designate time in a day that is finite. So the day is going to be just so long. The year is going to be just so long. So how do we think about time differently? Particularly for teachers, where, and I can talk about the US example, there are many different and better examples around the world, but in the US, we don't think about teachers as working unless they are in front of students instructing. And that is a conception that gets in the way of this notion of time, because so much of what teachers do may not be directly, instructing children or students, but has a huge impact on teaching and learning. So I thought about, some of the things that we might want to think about, and they're, as I said, not so different from what has been talked about so far, but from the teacher's point of view, we know they're at the center. We know that they will make or break innovations. We know that they're usually in place far longer than any government, policymaker, minister of education. They can ride it out. And we don't want them to simply look as though complying with an innovation. We want it to actually make a difference. So the first thing, I think, in terms of this conversation for Brazil, but for any system that's trying to make a difference, here teachers are being asked to think about learning differently. So what it means, what it looks like, how to recognize it. They have become accustomed to recognizing something that they call learning, and now they're being asked to look to recognize it as something else. As you said, you're moving from content to competency. So learning is going to be very different. That's the first level of learning for teachers. The second, different level of learning, means a different way of teaching. And so they'll need support in order to do that. The third, I've already talked about time, but it's that time to practice, to look at examples, to work together, to examine models, to really translate and deeply understand what the new standards mean and look like in practice. I read some research recently that it takes at least 6 to 10 opportunities for practice over the course of months for anyone to kind of own something new. And that's just the beginning. The fourth is leadership and principles. So any change, once you touch one part, all the other parts shift. But principals are going to be critical because they're the ones who provide the support, the leadership, and the time. And so if I had to think about who needs to be sort of the first group, perhaps school building leaders are. Because quite often we think about teachers, being part of a turnkey approach. You identify key teachers and they will teach everyone else, and that is critical. But teachers can't evaluate each other. Teachers work and have relationships with their peers. They may not be able to do things with someone who has 20 years of experience versus someone who has 2 years of experience. Parents and families, our Common Core suffered from parents and families and communities not understanding. So what they saw was their children being upset. What they saw were tests that they didn't understand. What they didn't see was what it would mean because they haven't been able to see it yet. And the last thing I will say, which everyone has said and is connected to the diagram that Susan put up, the whole context needs to shift as well. So it's principals, it's families, it's teachers, it's even children, but it is also universities and the public government agencies, et cetera. So a huge sort of massive public education campaign becomes important. Thank you.
I would just like to kind of follow up and then ask the Brazilian experts if you think that we are ready. I don't know if you know, but a lot of our private schools never had to follow a specific curriculum. We have publishers that also are following now broad guidelines, and they're going to have to change how they publish. We have authors that are going to have to change how they view curriculum, how they translate this. And like Lynn and Susan were saying, this is very complex. It's not going to be just switching one thing around or pouring more money that is going to make the difference. So maybe just very quickly, if you think that we're ready, and if we're not, where should we be getting on?
Oh, I do actually believe we have a clear strategy that involve all the points that Susan pointed out here and some specific issues that we have to address. For instance, our schools are famous for not having accountability. Our system as a whole does not have accountability as a principle. So this is something we also have to change. But talking about the specific issues that Letitia has raised, so being able to organize and to help publishing companies to produce materials to support the reform is something crucial. And we have to deal with that. So actually we have to start planning how to produce the materials that will be linked and will support teachers in their daily basis in the classrooms. So this and also teachers training is fundamental. But at the same time, it's not one thing at the moment, it's everything at the same time. And I'm very glad that we are late, because at least we can learn from you, from Australia, from British Columbia, from many other countries that have already gone through this path. And I think that there are good lessons to be learned and things, and very good and bad lessons to be learned too, because it's very important to learn from mistakes. And I think that we have a solid ground of research and of experiences to be supported upon to design this implementation model. It's a hard task, but I think we can try to do it.
I just want to suggest something radical, which I know you can't do, but how I wish we had done. I wish we had started K through 2 or 3. Let that get in there. Then go, 4, 5, 6. It would take 20 years, but we would have children in 4th grade who had the foundation to be able to understand and achieve the standards for 4th grade. I know it's a timeline no political system has, but that's what I would wish.
Well, especially in Brazil with 7 education ministers in the last 4 years. But I think that that's important because Vera brought the accountability aspect, and it hasn't been, we don't know yet what's the assessment going to be like. we are not sure. We have indications. Brazil traditionally only had an end of cycle, so the high school exit assessment, that was the entry to university, so not necessarily everyone had to do it. But right now, there might be some new things coming along, and we're not sure. So that could be something else that we should be looking at. And then just really quickly, I think Alice has more internal perspective of these groups. Like, what are the key players that should be listening to us right now and helping us think about this change?
Well, everybody. When we were preparing for this panel, Vera said something that I think was really, really right, that we need to conquer hearts and minds, both teachers on the ground, from universities, parents, families, students. People need to understand why this reform is important and necessary. So we have many pieces that need to come together in this process. So, for example, there are inductors, did you say it? Yeah. That can be used in this case for Brazil. So, for example, what happens in this evaluation that Leticia said, NA, that's our evaluation that leads students to universities, this is going to make sure that content or competences are being focused on. The way you select teachers for public schools and for private schools, this is going to induct how universities or teacher training centers work. The way the textbooks are elaborated or chosen, when you set clear guidelines connected to the standards, that also makes sure that it influences how these textbooks and materials are going to be elaborated, aligned to the standards. So we need to make sure that the standards are going to be the heart of the whole system and not the other way around. So on the one hand, I think we're going to have to conquer hearts and minds and to have a very good communication effort to the whole country and to many stakeholders. And on the other hand, I think we're going to have main challenges in those fronts. So assessments, teacher training, both initial and on the job, assessments, textbooks, transforming the standards into meaningful curricula. So I think these are the main challenges that we're going to have ahead, and everybody is connected to that somehow, so we need to speak to everyone.
Well, we're starting. I see a bunch of Brazilian leadership representatives here, and if you're not, you're invited to become one.
Yeah.
I think there's just one last thing, and then I would like to invite you guys to ask us some questions. But what do you see as the innovation in this curriculum? I mean, if we're after all of these other ones and we have looked and we've learned, how are we showing that we learn, or are we just going to show this during the implementation? I think that that's something that maybe you guys can give us a little hint. And the document is published, it's open, it's in Portuguese. Hopefully you'll be able to access it, but we'll make it available.
Well, it's horrible to say that, but I think our main innovation is that we want students to learn. So this is a student-centered curricula, and this is a huge innovation. We're actually talking about students. Sometimes you would see whole discussions going on, and you wouldn't hear the word student. So this is student-centered, and it shows what is their right to education. I think that's a huge innovation. And if we get students, all students to learn, that's going to be the most great innovation of all. So I would say that.
I just would like to add something. As I said, there is no accountability in the system, so it may be a first tool for accountability, since parents and society are entitled to know what every student should learn at each grade. So it's also a great innovation. So I think we start from a good document. It's a good start. Now we have to go to the next challenges.
I would like to, does anybody have a specific question? Behind you.
Hello, my name is D.L. Moffat, and I'm a recent admitted student to Teachers College. My question is for anyone on the panel. What do you think, after hearing you guys discuss so much about Brazil's Common Core, what do you guys believe is the role of education in society?
I think that's for you, Lynn.
So I appreciate the fact that you use the word education and not schooling. And I think that too much of educational history has focused on schooling, has focused on, sort of technical aspects of that process, how many years and how old and, what the subjects are and what have you. But the idea of an education means that you have a vision of a person for the future. That there is something that you want to share with the learner, because there is sort of wisdom of society, wisdom of history, wisdom of past lessons. But you also understand that that person is moving into a future that you have no understanding of. I mean, we're all looking forward, and we have no idea what is going to happen. I mean, the simple thing like an iPhone or a cell phone, everyone in this room can remember when those things didn't exist. And that's pretty remarkable. So if I think about the purpose of an education, it is to help folks, to help young people be ready for a world that has not yet happened. And we talk about it all the time, and yet we focus in the opposite direction. We talk about being able to deal with uncertainty. We talk about critical thinking. We talk about problem solving. We talk about cooperation, and then we do the exact opposite. So we've always known what education should be for. It's about the implementation, always.
Okay. I am Stephen Theibish. At some points in my long career in the New York system, I taught music appreciation, which itself I was just lucky to be in some schools where you could do that. I did it as a cluster teacher. But my particular question is obviously Brazil is trying to deal with the fundamentals of education, reading and math. But just as in the United States, I'm sure there are plenty of people in Brazil who would like to see more arts and music in the curriculum. I will give a specific example, and I'm just curious to what degree would these core curriculum changes affect something that I think is very important. We could call the equivalent of Brazilian classical music, and I'm thinking particularly of the extremely distinguished Senor Hector Villa-Lobos. I spent 3 weeks in Brazil in 1970, if I didn't say it before. And I just wonder whether, I think that music is very important, obviously, I think we all do, but I wonder if anything in these rearrangements of the core curriculum will make it more likely, let's say, talking about music and history, that a really powerful piece of music, such as Villa-Lobos's Descobrimento do Brasil, which I'm sure was heard more often in the Brazilian schools in 1970 and certainly in 1940, would anything in this curriculum change increase the likelihood that at least, not to mention even to get exposed to the music of Caetano Veloso, who I believe was probably the minister of culture, or at least the minister involved in music.
Yeah.
That's my general question. Same thing with art, thinking particularly of the big Brazilian painters like Portinari and Cavalcanti from the earlier and mid-20th century.
I think
So leave it with those.
Alice can bring us a little bit of how that is being brought up.
I'm glad you mentioned all those nice names. My heart just got warm, like I love them all. Thank you.
All of us.
One of the nice innovations of this document is that it is competence-based, and one of the 10 competences that it sets out as important for all the students to develop is cultural fruition, so to enjoy and learn how to not only develop but also understand and enjoy cultural aspects not only from Brazil but also from the world. So the idea is to make sure that these competences are being worked on throughout the school years, all the school years, and in many disciplines. I haven't read the document, and I can't say if they mention Heitor Villa-Lobos or Caetano Veloso. I hope they have. But I'm pretty sure that that's what they had in mind when they wrote this competence.
Here in the front, and then here, and then there.
Thank you. My question is really...
Just one sec. Maybe we can listen to all the questions, and then we'll answer all at once. Is that okay? Please, Scott? Okay, so there's a question here, a question right behind you, and a question back there.
Okay. Brazil is a very big country, not only physically, but in terms of population. So it's a very huge undertaking. It is a federated system. In a federated system, generally, the local units, states and the local units have more authorities in terms of social programs, including education. I think I heard you, Vera, saying that here are folks in Brasilia sitting in a room and trying to come up with a national picture or national plan for education policies, and on the other side, there are the states who may be doing their own things in terms of curriculum and local level policies and so on. The question is, A, who is primarily responsible for education in the country? B, if these agencies at various levels are working in a different way, how do you harmonize so that there is no conflict, at any level?
We'll get her right behind you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lívia. I'm a Brazilian, and I'm a current student here. My question is, whenever I think about Common Core in Brazil, I always worry about comunidades ribeirinhas, riverside communities, indigenous communities, and how are they, because you mentioned, I haven't read the document yet, you mentioned competence, and how are the teachers there or the educators? Because not only they learn in schools, they learn outside of schools many of times. How are they being supported? Because we have a group of people thinking about how to construct the document, but how are we giving this document fluency? How is it actually getting into the schools and being a helpful tool and not only something else created by the MEC, and that will sometimes make it harder for teachers to teach.
And then just one last question, and we'll...
My question also has to do with something like that. My name is Claire Stiglmeyer. I'm a recently admitted student here. And I've been living in Paraguay for the last 6 years, first with the Peace Corps and then teaching in an international school. And one of the main things that I saw was the difficulty in the implementation of new policy in education, the dispersal of the materials and of the curriculum throughout the country, even though Paraguay is vastly smaller than Brazil, obviously, but it was very hard to get those resources, maybe in Brazil to the places, the riverside communities, or to deeper into the tribes, and just from the capital city of Asunción in Paraguay to just even maybe an hour or two outside of the capital city, those materials would just disappear. as they would be taken by those textbooks and things like that. And when you get further into the interior, the countryside of the country, they wouldn't exist at all. The textbooks, everything, they'd still be using from the 1950s, from the 1940s. And those materials, I'm not sure if there's a way with technology now to make them available to teachers, or even the teacher trainings to be done virtually or things like that. It's very hard in a third world developing country to make that implementation seamless and to get those materials dispersed in a way. And I'm wondering if there's any idea of how they could do that in a country the size of Brazil.
Yeah, absolutely. I think perhaps we'll just go around here one last round, answering them and maybe talking about who are the actual people taking it, and if we're really going to reach the entire country of Brazil with these.
I'll try to answer the same question, the three questions in the same text. Well, first of all, the three levels of government have specific entitlements. So actually, federal level has no schools. They don't run schools, but they are entitled to set the policy. So it's right. What has been done till now is perfect. So now we have implementation. Implementation is something that states and municipalities have to do, and also private schools. So actually, now the role of the federal level is to support these levels in order that they are able to really implement. So it's not so different from what you have here. And so harmonizing all this is not easy, but it's somehow what we have been doing for a long time, and not really successful in some places, but somehow we are successful in many others. And talking about the differences, what we have now is a common document. Just like Common Core, we don't have curricula. So every state and every municipality has to develop their curricula, which is a problem. And we already have indigenous education. We already have other groups, special educations, and we have even textbooks for these groups in the society. So we have to improve these policies, of course, and we have to adapt these policies to what we are intending to do now. But it's on the map. It must be.
I think that how are we on time, Scott? We just like run over time already. Well, I think that there is a saying that the current secretary that has been leading the last version and the last group of researchers that have finalized this document, and she says that we say that this standards are going to cover the essential. So for a lot of schools, that's going to be equal to maybe 60% of what their teaching time is. But what she says is, well, the 60% is actually 100%, because that's what we as a country are choosing to ensure everybody gets the right to learn, and that we can actually look for equity. And I think that you've given us some very important insights, special attention to teacher training, to assessments not driving this change, and I think that we are very hopeful, and I would like to thank all of you, and again, all your knowledge, and especially your cheering, your support behind Brazil trying to make steps towards change, and especially change in education. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. You can always come to Brazil.